Well, good morning. My name is Lieutenant General Jim Dawkins, and I'm the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration. And I'm hosting today's Nuclear Modernization panel. Before I get started, I'd like to thank AFA and our industry partners for hosting such a great event. In my role, I am singularly focused on ensuring that we advocate for the needs of the nuclear enterprise. And one of my primary roles these days is advocating on the need for nuclear modernization. We've heard a lot about threats yesterday. We heard about pacing threats and strategic competitors. We see it on the world stage every day. The threat is real, whether we're talking conventional or nuclear. Just a couple of data points, though, on the nuclear front. With regard to Russia, Russia is over 80% complete with their nuclear modernization programs. More worrisome is that they've delved into novel nuclear weapons concepts and capabilities, things that we don't have an answer to other than a strong deterrent that we currently have today. Those novel weapons are not covered by any treaty at any rate, not covered by New START or anything like that, and that causes us great concern. Turning to China, you've heard Admiral Richard and others talk about a breakout, a strategic breakout. Really what that means to the everyday person is that China's gone from being a lesser nuclear state to having a couple hundred weapons to a state that's projected to have over 1,000 or up to 1,000 nuclear weapons by the end of the decade. That's a rapid growth. We've seen it in open source intel, how they have gone on a breakneck pace to develop ICBM launch facilities in their country. And again, that is what has caused us a lot of pause and concern from STRATCOM. For the first time ever, we are deterring two peer nuclear competitors. And that has to change how we look at the world. Well, the U.S. just started our modernization journey, or we're in the beginning of it now. Just fielded, or again started to produce with the NNSA, the B-61 Mod 12. We are taking a 1970s Minuteman III, designed for 10 years of service life. It's been extended for 40 to 50 years now, and we're transitioning, or we're going to transition to GBSD at the end of the decade. We've got a 1950s B-52, flown by several generations of people in some cases, and we're going to modernize that with new engines, radar, and comm suite. We've got a 1980s B-2, and we'll be transitioning to a B-21. Our 1980s air-launched cruise missile will be transitioned to the long-range standoff missile. And of course, all of this is underpinned by an NC-3 system that is very old and is being modernized as we go and as we transition to what we call next-gen NC-3. The challenging piece is that we're fielding all of these systems, or modernizing all of these systems simultaneously, and they will be come into play towards the end of the decade. That includes the Navy's Columbia class. So all three legs of the triad are being modernized at the same time, and we don't have a lot of margin left or a lot of extra time here for program slips or delays or things like that, because we have to keep what we currently have safe, secure, and reliable as we transition to more safe, more secure, and more effective systems that can meet future threats. The sense of urgency has never been more important. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said the same thing, but Ukraine has brought that into sharper focus. Time-certain delivery is required, and what that's going to take is a joint team between the Air Force and our industry partners, represented by the three panelists to my left. We are guided in our work by Christine Jezeretz. She's the Director of Nuclear Command and Control and Communications, or NC3 as we call it, with Lockheed Martin. To her left is Paul Ferraro, President of Air Power, Raytheon Missiles and Defense, and finally Jim Kowalski, Vice President and Corporate Lead, Air Force Customer Relations, Government Relations with Northrop Grumman. What I'd like to do, we're going to start off with a brief opening comments from each of the panelists and then go to 3 rounds of questions. So Christine, over to you.
Thank you, General Dawkins, for allowing me to be a part of this panel and talk about how industry and government can collaborate on this important issue. In many ways, NC3 represents the final phase of reinvigorating the nuclear enterprise, and I believe the most critical. But how do we tackle this problem? It's very large. I'd offer 4 thoughts. First, we have to be willing to change. Change is not a technology problem. It's a psychology problem. People fuel change and sustain its momentum. We need to look at the policies and processes and procedures and ask, do they transcend architectural decisions, or were they the result of implementation of the system at the time? Next, we need to subdivide the problem into smaller pieces, a comms layer and a processing tier. The comms layer today did not benefit from an enterprise architecture that was ubiquitously connecting assets. Why? Because commercial tech was a rotary phone, and comms as a service was a party line. Our spot in the technology continuum allows us to connect all these intergenerational systems together to provide that foundational layer for the processing tier. The processing tier today relies on pre-connected circuits, and data aggregation was the net-centric dream. We now have the means to aggregate the data and distill that data into important information for the warfighter. Next, we need to infuse technology. Admiral Richards says NC3 fits hand in glove with JADC2. And we need to make sure that we introduce the technologies that we've been doing in JADC2, like 5G.mil, and then once we have that super connected weapon system, we can aggregate the data into cloud technologies and use AI/ML to distill information to have optimized course of action plans. And then finally, we need to garner funding support. But how do we get decision makers to prioritize electrons through wires and algorithms? The experts in marketing intangible products offer a couple of thoughts. First, humanize the product. Have operators that use the system day to day be able to provide testimonies. And through digital engineering, we can then animate the problem. Demonstrate through movies what they're feeling today and how the modernization can really help. This is a difficult problem, but we've been here before. And I have optimism that we will attack this modernization with the same fortitude that built the system that's kept us safe for decades. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thanks, Christine. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, General. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. So the National Defense Strategy and the Nuclear Posture Review are yet to be released, but as the General mentioned, I don't think any of us are going to be surprised when we see China and Russia prominently mentioned in each of those documents. Regaining and maintaining our ability to deter and defeat near-peer threats like China is a top priority for the United States Air Force, and as industry partners, a top priority of ours. Continued modernization of the triad is central to that strategy. Each leg offers a unique element of the nuclear triad, and each are equally important. The sea leg offers survivability. The land leg, or the ICBMs, brings responsive deterrence and deterrence in numbers. And then the air leg provides a visible and flexible response, and that visibility and flexible response can compel behavior internationally. With respect to the air leg, LRSO provides the nuclear triad's modernization hedge, the gap, if you will, or gap filler, if you will. The program provides unmatched visible, credible, and strategic deterrence. Rooted in nuclear surety, it must be safe, secure, reliable, and above all, survivable. And that's what LRSO, or the Long Range Standoff Program, does. The program is progressing well. Since its earliest inception, since it was a New START program, we've infused model-based systems engineering and digital engineering, and truly have designed it not only to meet the stringent performance requirements of the weapon system itself, but designed it from the earliest phases of the program for producibility and, equally importantly, maintainability. We've undergone a very successful and extensive ground and flight test program throughout 2021, and that test program continues today. And again, the focus on maintainability throughout the lifetime has been paramount as we design this program. We've entered the EMD phase following TMRR phase approximately 8 months ahead of the original baseline program, and to this day, we maintain that 8-month margin. So critical to maintaining our need to field this capability as quickly as possible is going to be maintaining and securing the presidential budget request for both 22 and 23, and allowing us to maintain that accelerated scheduled performance as we head into both Milestone C and then ultimately IOC. And with that, sir, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Jim.
Thank you, General Dawkins. You know, one of the fundamentals about the world, and there's a lot of comments about a new Cold War, about the rising threat of China, but the fundamentals of deterrence have not changed. And it's about an adversary's perception of our will and our capability. And by not only modernizing the triad, but recapitalizing, replacing with new systems designed for the 21st century, using 21st century tools, using 21st century concept of operations, not only puts the marker on the table for pacing the threat with capability, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, it shows that the will of the United States to remain the responsible global leader is still there. And you get both of those by recapitalizing the force. This is foundational to everything we do. One thing that we used to say is that when the Secretary of State walks into a room with an adversary country or an ally, the gorilla in the room back in the corner, that 800-pound gorilla is our nuclear force. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Now to round one of questions. So, Christine, the addition of NC3 as a line of effort within JADC2 is critical to ensure reliable communications and information sharing across all domains and competition continuum. How do you see the relationship between conventional C2 and C3 and NC3 evolving the development of JADC2, the pursuit of conventional nuclear integration? A lot of things we threw at you there. A lot of acronyms, but tell us how you're going to make it happen.
That's okay. I can do this. The investments that we're making in 5G.mil, band agile comms, and zero trust networks really encompasses both the requirements and needs that NC3 has, as well as JADC2. Encompasses the needs that both systems have. And day to day, NC3 really operates in a fairly benign state. But it also has to remain survivable through conflict. And so traditionally that survivable line between the president and the nuclear forces has been called the thin line. Today we have the technology to be able to thicken that thin line. And as we go into conflict, we're going to expect deprecation in that communication infrastructure. And so we're also working with key business partners to provide persistent communications through contested and denied environments in order to deliver those important messages to the shooters. Additionally, we're looking at AI and ML solutions because once everything is connected, you then can have data aggregation and operate on that with AI ML. You're able to distill large quantities of data quickly and really be able to get after increasing that decision-making timeline for the decision makers and senior leaders. And so that's how I see them going together.
Yes, thanks. That decision-making timeline, giving them more time to decide, is truly a key piece of this as we go forward, so thanks for that answer. Paul, so during your discussion on LRSO, you mentioned design for manufacturing and design for maintainability, and we discussed this the other day as well. How does Raytheon maintain this balance?
This is a very unique program in this regard. As I mentioned, since its earliest inception, we've used model-based system engineering and digital engineering processes, and this program, again, more than any program that I've had the opportunity to be involved in throughout my career. We fully modeled our factory floor and have included that into our design process. Since its earliest phases, it's beginning with our first flight test vehicle and ground test vehicle. All of our test vehicles are being built on our factory floor using factory personnel, factory procedures, factory processes, collecting the units, if you will, and production metrics that we use to enhance our cost model and build our cost model with an eye toward manufacturability and recurring cost. But perhaps even more importantly, as the General mentioned, the life expectancy of these programs is decades. And building these systems for maintainability throughout that lifetime is absolutely critical. So to that end, very early in our design phase, we brought in the airmen from Vandenberg, Minot, Tinker, and Barksdale to partner with our design team, the design team that oftentimes doesn't work with the logistics folks and the maintenance folks, and really inform the design process and inform some of the design attributes. We went so far as 3D printing a translucent model of the missile itself, ran the wiring harnesses through, put in mocked up versions of our line replaceable units, and asked the airmen to go and perform the maintenance procedures as they were drafted at that point, and really took note of what worked, what didn't, and where we needed to modify the design so that it would be maintainable as intended throughout the lifetime of the product. And then updating our cost model accordingly to really optimize the life cycle cost of the weapon system. So pretty exciting stuff.
Oh, that's so important. And you know, as I mentioned in my opening remarks about how many of these systems were designed for maybe a 10-year service life, to include the Outcome and of course Minuteman III, and they're decades beyond there. Decades beyond that because basically largely due to the airmen that are carrying the weight of this work on their back day in and day out, working the supply chain issues with your companies to continue to find those vendors to be able to produce those old systems, and that's becoming more difficult every day. And I'm happy about your comments about designing this in for more than a 10-year life, if you will, and making these things more or easier to sustain for those airmen so they don't have to come up with new ways to do things on the fly, that they're actually doing processes that have been proven out with folks on your team. So thanks for that. Jim, over to you. Today's global security environment appears to be very different from that at the end of the Cold War. How has this affected the modernization of our nuclear forces?
Probably the biggest change, and this is at the national level, and it really isn't so much a change as it is an improvement from our perspective, and that is growing bipartisan support in Congress. There's a recognition of the threat by Congress, and they've enacted or acknowledged it as they've proceeded with the budget. So not only have they agreed to modernize the programs and agreed to retain the triad, but they've agreed to recapitalize GBSD, and that's a big and important step. And the result of that is that we've put stability into our program, which long-term keeps it on time, and that funding stability also preserves the workforce and allows us to grow that workforce, and it improves the morale of the people in the program, both on the industry and government side, and in my mind, improves the morale of the airmen and the folks that are out there in the field because they see their nation cares about what they do. The other place that I think this has an impact is this idea of a sense of urgency behind how the global situation, the global security environment has evolved over the last 7 or 8 years. In particular, we've had a number of the senior leaders who are responsible for this mission set, responsible to defend the nation and provide that nuclear deterrence, go to the Hill, go to the media, go out to think tanks, walk the halls of the Pentagon, and they've carried a consistent message, and this would be from General Hyten, Admiral Richard, General Ray, General Cotton, and that message has been, we have no margin left. You have to do this program now. We can no longer afford to sit back and do another study and wait a few more years. That, in turn, has this sort of a drumbeat of a sense of urgency into the programs. Now, there's limited ability of government and industry to accelerate a program, but by golly, we're going to stay on this schedule. And you can put discipline into both government and industry when everybody makes it clear that the schedule is priority one. And that in turn, and I've seen this over my last 6 years with Northrop, is it has actually driven a culture shift in some programs where they're not sitting on opposite sides of the table negotiating every line of a contract. They've got the communications and transparency and common goals, and they're figuring this out together. So that kind of partnership and that kind of trust is really critical. So I think, the global security environment has reawakened a lot of folks to the importance of this enterprise. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. And to your point, I see that every day when I go and talk to staffers or Hill members, as well as engage with think tanks and others. Once you get them in the room and explain to them what these programs are and the history behind the current programs, and they have a better understanding. I mean, we've got broad bipartisan support on the Hill, and I'll say it again, broad bipartisan support on the Hill for the nuclear modernization programs, both of the Air Force and the Navy. But it's going to take that constant communication, because more than once I've heard with regard to GBSD and Minuteman III, you mean it's more than just a simple missile swap? Yes, it's more than just a simple missile swap. It's all the launch facilities and all the C2 and all the alert facilities, all that, and the LFs being modernized, all that goes into GBSD. And that's important to keep folks tracking on the context surrounding the modernization we're about to do. So Christine, you talked about hypersonics, and we've talked about other novel weapons are out there, AI and machine learning, and how that can cut into the decision timeline, and particularly the hypersonics. That national leadership has to be able to make a smart decision on whether or not to employ nuclear weapons or other strategic type of capabilities. So what are some of the concepts and some of the solutions that we can be pursuing now to accelerate communications and increase decision space through complex and shortened timelines?
Sure. The orthogonal relationship between detecting that fast-moving threat, that hypersonic threat, against the need to elongate that timeline is truly a difficult problem. And it's going to require some different ways to think about how we sense the problem, so our sensing tier, as well as make us a lot more dependent on data aggregation and AI/ML type of technologies in order to distill very large sums of data. So as we move forward with this, we can look at the sensing tier and look to figure out how we can use additional sensors. We have to increase the amount of sensing surface that we have in order to be able to track this threat properly. So we can consider commercial sensors or even government sensors that are in the ground, air, and space tier. This will require some policy changes in order to accept the observations from these non-traditional sensor sources into the algorithms that eventually confirm and type the threat. Additionally, we're going to become more dependent on higher volumes of data, and in order to distill that data into information that's meaningful to the warfighter, we're going to use AI/ML to do so that we can optimize the O-plans going forward. All of these things together really help to shrink that processing timeline and elongate the timeline for the decision maker. And kind of foundational to this, and others have talked about this morning as well, is we really need to have digital technology to tell us, as we're making this modernized system, what are the second, third, and fourth order effects from a systems of systems perspective. And so we need to have digital twins so that we can do that and really make the best decisions as we move forward in this modernization.
Thanks, Christine. A key point there, I think, of what you're getting at as well is resilience. We want resilience in our NC3 architecture and to be able to do NC2 over a host of different types of systems. We want to leverage what we can from JADC2. Why spend double money on two different systems when we don't today? We use conventional command and control systems even today for this mission space. And we have special carve-outs for the hardened nuclear comms as we degrade from the thick line, as you call it, to the thin line. That's the same thing that we've been trying to get people to understand with JADC2, is that we'll take what we can from JADC2 and have a carve-out for specific thin line type things. I know that General Cotton and Mr. Stevenson up at Stratcom are working hard on these architectures. So Paul, going over to you, a little bit more on digital engineering and model-based systems engineering. They're key components to Air Force acquisition now. That seems to be the wave of the future force. How's Raytheon meeting those requirements?
Requirements for model-based systems engineering?
And digital engineering.
Digital engineering. Well, I mentioned earlier some of the work that we've done to design our factory floor and how we've very early on adopted a very high fidelity cost model that captures not only the cost of the unit itself, but the life cycle cost, and really folded in the expert opinions and feedback that we received from the airmen that inform not only how we're going to maintain the system throughout our procedures and tooling and test equipment, but really inform the design at a very early stage. Make sure that we were very mindful of that with our design team, who oftentimes doesn't have that direct interaction with the airmen who maintain these weapon systems throughout their lifetime. But also, digital engineering and model-based systems engineering really allows us not only to move faster through the development cycle, but really augment what has classically been our test and evaluation program. So I mentioned earlier that throughout 2021 and continuing in 2022, we have our ongoing ground and flight test program that is well underway, and will continue to inform our design and assess our performance through that. But equally important, if not more important, using model-based systems engineering is the flight simulation capabilities that we have. So again, we have a very high fidelity model or digital twin of the model itself, or of the missile itself, and using DevSecOps in an agile environment, we're able to upload new versions of software almost daily, and essentially fly our missile in a virtual environment upwards of 6 million miles an evening. And we fly it in a representative theater environment to really exercise the system itself, find out does our software work the way it's intended, how does the overall system perform, what's its survivability, were the objectives met, share that information real time, not only with our overall design team, but with our Air Force partners and leaders, and collectively decide how do we modify the design from here? How quickly can we respond to what we've learned? Can we anchor our models when we do go to a flight test and really augment that program in a very, very meaningful way? So not only are we moving faster, we've developed a much more robust process and design capability.
Thanks, Paul. And you mentioned software. You know, with our current systems, it was all about hardware. And today it's becoming more and more about software and making sure you have software engineers that can write the code fast enough for the hardware development. So that's just a key component of all of our systems that I get to be exposed to. Jim, a little bit more on digital engineering from Northrop here. Is it important to nuclear modernization, and why?
Yeah, as we've already talked about here, it completely changes how we do a lot of business. Digital tools, digital solutions allow us, first and foremost, to reduce the risk. And by reducing risk, you get more confidence in your schedule. You've taken things that could have been problems out in the future that would put the time back in the schedule, and you solved them ahead of time by doing things in parallel. That in turn, because you're not going to be wasting time redoing work, that's going to reduce your cost. And then one of the most important things as we face a world where we're dealing with China as a primary competitor is we've got to be able to upgrade our systems faster. And one of the key things that digital tools, digital solutions does for us is it allows us to get a much faster cycle time out there. So when we talk about the B-21, the B-21 has been using digital engineering since day one to design, test, and build out that system. And then what that has given the B-21 is it's allowed us to build that airplane much faster, and at the same time be able to keep it up to speed with the pace of the threat, so that when it is fielded, it's going to be a fully capable airplane. And those of us who've been in this business for a while know that normally when you field an airplane, it's out there with a baseline capability, and as you learn and train with it, you slowly grow and add things on. And we see, the major command that owns it finally get it up several years later to what we call a full operational capability. Well, we don't want to be doing that with our B-21. And one of the important things here is that that idea of rapid upgradability, not only in the design and build process, but after the airplane is fielded. So by using DevStar Ops, open mission systems, we can get away from, I know Global Strike doesn't want to do block upgrades. They don't want to have a list of things to put on the airplane to update or upgrade and then go through 18 months or 2-year process, and then all of a sudden they get that upgrade. They want it to look like your phone, where there's an update, and it happens in the middle of the night, and your phone is better as a result of that upgrade. You know, we see a lot of companies out there doing that. That's driven a lot by that idea of DevStar Ops and Agile software to be able to do that kind of upgrades so that when we can not only do it virtually instantaneously, but when you get to bigger upgrades, for example, weapons, we're able to do it in months and not years, and that's huge. On GBSD, GBSD is the first program to get the E-program designation from the Air Force because of its use of digital tools, digital engineering, and open mission systems and those digital architectures. GBSD has also been recognized by the acquisition community in a recent biennial report for their use of digital twins and modeling, not only to make decisions within the program as they're moving forward, but also to start teasing out that digital thread so that we're not just being digital while we're building the platform, but we're going to carry through those digital models and digital twins, we're going to carry that digital thread forward into training, sustainment, maintenance, all the aspects of how we do that. And then once it gets out in the field, our airmen are also, they're going to tell us what else they need and how else we can use it. So, you know, I think we're making great progress with that.
Thanks, Jim. Those risk reduction efforts I'm seeing across our industry partners, and that's definitely been, I think, a big win. Again, allowing us those upgrades faster. And then the open mission system architecture, I think, is another key piece of this to allow others to plug and play and determine how best to integrate with the systems. So Christine, and this is our final round here. We talked about all 3 legs of the triad being modernized simultaneously. So the challenge I see, and I've been talking to folks like you, how do we ensure that NC3 is, if we're able to keep up with that and maintain our reliable access now and be able to transition into the future?
Yeah, truly NC3 is, you know, the 4th leg of the triad and is the Manhattan Project of our time. And it's going to require the same results-based tenacity to solve. And as we look at the triad being modernized, there's an asynchronous modernization to that. They're not all coming due at the same time. And so I'd offer, much like we've been talking about here today, is that digital engineering can also help us chart that path to a transition plan. So through modeling, we'll be able to understand how we can modernize things the quickest in the comms tier and the processing tier to optimize the solution. And as we move forward, there's certainly, you know, complexities. And across the industrial base, we have all of the knowledge. And so something that I'd also like to offer is the thought of perhaps using a national team approach. The complexities of this and certainly the knowledge base, if there's clear governance, we can really be a force multiplier in modernizing this and maintaining that good continuity of operations as we do so.
Thanks, and that is going to be the, I guess, the Manhattan Project of our time, as you talked about, just linking all this together. There are 204 NC3 systems. Air Force owns about 70% of that. It's space, it's ground, it's airborne. It covers the all of the regimes there. Paul, turning to you, you mentioned the nuclear posture review. We heard our chief talk about continuing resolutions. How does a company work through that, you know, when those unknowns?
Well, like all of us, we're interested in nuclear posture review. When it's published, we'll certainly dive into that and make sure we understand the implications of that, as that's going to define our national policy with regard to nuclear modernization. So we'll await that publication, the availability of that document. Regard to CRs, reality is we've been here before. And the good news is I think we've learned how to work through it, sometimes more gracefully than other times. But I think this really speaks to the partnership that we as industry partners need to continue to maintain and bolster with the Air Force. And you know, as with any program, there's always three elements that need to be managed: cost, schedule, and technical performance. And in this case, I have never seen a situation where all three are so vital and so critical to our national security. We need to deliver the capabilities that we're asked to deliver, and we will certainly maintain our focus on technical performance. Cost is paramount. There is no more money, and we simply don't have the resources that we need to do all the things that must be done. But schedule is paramount, and as an industry partner, teaming with our Air Force counterparts, we will certainly bring to bear all the resources that we have available to maintain schedule and make sure that we deliver these capabilities on or ahead of schedule.
Yeah, you know, something that I think is really important here is the stable requirements piece of this. And as the Air Force, we've got to make sure that we have stable requirements and we don't continue to try to change things right now. Right now, I think we've got those locked down pretty well. And then the teaming aspect, I think, is real important with the program managers and the PEOs, and I see that when I go out to visit with them. Jim, our final question. Again, you mentioned this a little bit. You're working two of the Air Force's largest programs, and they are for nuclear modernization, the B-21 and GBSD. What have been the key challenges?
Well, there's certainly no shortage of challenges in any large acquisition program. And of course, we've seen, you know, COVID and workforce and continuing resolutions have been out there. But what I mentioned at the beginning was that drumbeat of what's going on in the world, that drumbeat of we've got to have a sense of urgency here. How do we put the speed into the program? And really, digital engineering, and to circle back to that one more time, has given us the ability to design, test, and build this bomber, or all of these weapon systems faster than ever before. And we've put ourselves in a position where we have the ability or the potential to take a bomber or a missile from contract award to initial operational capability in less than a decade. We have to stay on that track. And what's important for us here is to not only acknowledge that there's challenges out there, but how do we take advantage of the opportunity? How do we evolve the acquisition processes so that they can learn from these other programs so they can also advance at the speed of technology? Because that's what the digital engineering and all those tools and solutions have allowed us to do. And that's the only way we're going to keep up and stay paced with the threat. And in particular, the B-21 program has been a great example of how to manage this. The kind of relationships that the RCO has built with Global Strike Command, RCO on the acquisition side, Global Strike Command on the user side, as they've clarified the operational needs, if they've worked through the trade space, have been essential to this kind of speed. And the role of Northrop Grumman and our industry partners in this, you know, we bring that expertise and the tools and technology to help make all of this happen. So what we've seen here is communication, transparency, common goals, and the term that we ought to all hope becomes more familiar is to be able to move not only at the speed of technology, but the speed of trust, so that we don't let our bureaucracies and our mistrust create the friction in there that slows programs down. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim, and that's a great point. I mean, needing that trust has never been more important, and I think again, as I started out, the current conflict in Ukraine has brought all this into sharper focus, and if it's not energizing the collective, the defense industrial base and the program offices and everybody that's a part of this nuclear deterrent, then perhaps, then it should, because the threat is real and it is there. Hey, thanks to the panelists for your time and the preparation required to come up here and talk about this very important subject. These discussions are great opportunities to ensure that the team that's out there maintaining and operating these systems every day understand the work that's going on right now to bring them a new capability, better capability, something easier to maintain, if you will. So let's give them a round of applause. All right, so I've been asked, say, don't forget the exhibit hall is still open, and we've got Spark Tank at 11:20, so don't miss it. Thank you.